Good evening. Tonight's story begins with some men digging a hole. It happened in a dry spring in central China, about 50 years ago, and what they found had been waiting underground for more than 2,000 years. You do not need to concentrate on any of this. There will be names and numbers, and you are welcome to let every one of them slide past. If you are asleep before the well is finished, that is a good outcome. Let your breathing slow down. We will take this very gently, and we are in no hurry at all. The place is Xi'an province, about 30 kilometers east of the city of Lebanon. It is a plain of fine yellow soil, called loess, that the wind laid down over many thousands of years. Loess is easy to dig and holds its shape well, which is why people in this region have long cut their homes and storage cellars directly into it. To the south stand the Xi'an hills. To the north runs the Wei River. Farmers here grow persimmons and pomegranates and wheat. Local people had always known there was old ground beneath their feet. Fragments turned up when land was plowed. There were stories about broken pottery figures, and some had been dug up before and reburied, or broken up, because a clay man in your field is not obviously useful and might well be considered unlucky. There is also, a mile or so away, a large hill that is not quite the right shape for a hill. It is too regular. It has been known for a very long time that this is a burial mound, and whose it is. It appears in a history written around a century after it was built. None of that had ever led anyone to expect what was in the field. The spring of 1974 was dry. The village of Xi'an, in what was then the Yanzhai commune, needed water, and a group of men were sent to dig a well in an orchard on the edge of the fields. Accounts differ slightly on how many were digging and who struck what first, which is common with events that only become important afterwards. Nobody was taking notes. One of them, young Xi'an, later became well known for it and spent many years signing books for visitors. At about a meter down, they came through the topsoil into hard reddish earth. Then pieces of fired clay began appearing. Then something more disconcerting, a shape like a human torso, then a head, then a piece of a kill floor, then some rusted bronze fittings that looked as though they belonged to weapons. The men did what most people would do. They stopped, and they discussed it, and they were not at all sure whether this was good news. Some fragments were carried back to the village. A local official took an interest, and word traveled, in stages, to people who knew what they were looking at. Archaeologists arrived that summer. The well was never finished. What they had found was the corner of a pit. Not a small one. As excavations spread outwards over the following months and years, the pit turned out to measure roughly 230 meters by 60, larger than 2 football pitches laid end to end. Inside it, standing in 11 long parallel corridors separated by walls of rammed earth, were soldiers made of terracotta, arranged in ranks facing east. Then a second pit was found nearby, and a third, and a fourth which had been left empty. The current estimate for the whole complex is somewhere around 8,000 figures, along with about 130 chariots, 520 chariot horses, and 150 cavalry horses. Most of them are still in the ground. Excavation has been deliberately slow, and for good reasons we will come to. The figures are roughly life-sized, and in fact slightly larger than most people of the period. Most stand between about 175 and 200 centimeters tall. They are hollow above the legs and solid below, so that they stand steady. They are heavy. A single infantryman weighs something like 150 kilograms. The detail that everyone repeats, and that is essentially true, is that the faces are all different. Standing along the edge of the pit, you see rank after rank of individuals: a broad face, a narrow one, a man with heavy brows, a man with a small moustache, an older face, a young one. It has the effect of a crowd rather than a pattern. How this was achieved is quietly interesting, and it is not magic. The workshops did not sculpt 8,000 people from scratch. They used a modular system. Bodies were built up in standard parts, legs, torso, arms, hands, from molds and coils of clay. Heads were made from a limited number of basic molds, perhaps 8 or 10 types. Then, while the clay was still soft, the details were added and altered by hand, ears pressed on separately, hair and topknots and beards modeled individually, the shape of the mouth adjusted, the eyelids cut. Ears in particular vary enormously, and no two seem to be identical. So the individuality is real, but it is the last few % of the work laid over a highly organized production line. It is mass manufacture with a human hand at the end of it, which is arguably a more impressive achievement than pure sculpture would have been. We even know something about who made them. Many figures carry a small stamped or inscribed name in an inconspicuous place under an arm, on the back of the neck, inside the robe. Around 85 names have been recovered. Some are workshop foremen from the palace workshops, some appear to be from local workshops. This was a quality control system. If a piece failed, the responsible name was on it. Which means that the men who made these figures are not entirely anonymous. We have their names, and nothing else at all about them. The organization behind the work was enormous. Ancient sources speak of very large numbers of laborers on the tomb complex as a whole, over decades. Those numbers are probably not reliable, but the scale of what survives makes it clear that this was a national undertaking. Along with the figures went real bronze weapons, swords, crossbow triggers, and tens of thousands of arrowheads, made to consistent standards, with parts that appear to have been interchangeable between weapons. The tolerances are tight enough that researchers have described the arrowhead production as an early example of the assembly line. Now the part that I think is the most extraordinary thing about the whole site, and the reason so much of it is still buried. They were painted. Every figure was covered in bright color, pink flesh tones, black hair, and robes and armor in vivid reds, greens, blues, purples and whites. The pigments were laid over a ground layer of lacquer, applied to the fired clay. So the army we picture as grey was originally as brightly colored as a parade. And when a figure is exposed after 2,000 years in damp soil, the lacquer layer begins to dry out and it curls away from the clay, taking the paint with it. In the early excavations, this happened in a matter of minutes. Not hours. Minutes. Conservators found themselves watching the color lift off and flake into the dust as they worked. A great deal has since been learned about how to prevent it, spraying with a stabilizing treatment, keeping the surfaces wet, working under cover and at controlled humidity, and modern excavation is now done slowly enough to preserve much more. But that is why the digging is not rushed. Much of the army is being deliberately left in the ground until we are confident we can bring it up without destroying what makes it remarkable. Another detail worth knowing, because it is often told badly. The bronze weapons came out of the ground in unusually good condition, and early analysis found chromium on their surfaces. This led to a widely repeated claim that Xi'an metalworkers had invented an anti-rust chromium treatment 2,000 years before anyone else. It is a lovely story. More recent work, published in 2019, suggests it is probably not right. The chromium appears to have come from the lacquer used on the wooden and bamboo parts nearby, contaminating the metal surfaces by contact. The weapon's good preservation seems to owe more to the particular chemistry of the local soil, which is mildly alkaline and low in organic material. I mention this because it is a good example of how knowledge about the site keeps being revised. Books written 20 years ago say the chromium thing confidently. It has taken careful re-examination to unpick it. There are certainly other things currently believed about this site that will be corrected in the same way in future, and we do not yet know which ones. That is not a weakness in the field. It is simply what an active piece of archaeology looks like from the inside, a set of careful statements, each of them provisional, each of them the best available reading of evidence that keeps growing. The figures belong to the tomb complex of the first emperor of a unified China, who died in 210 before the Common Era. He had come to the throne of the state of Qin as a boy, and by the end of his life had brought the warring states under one government, with a standardized script, standardized weights and measures, and even standardized axle widths for carts, so that wheel ruts on the roads would match. Work on his tomb is said to have begun very early in his reign and continued for decades. The pits of figures sit outside the tomb mound itself, facing east, in the direction of the states he conquered. We will not dwell on the wars, or on the harshness of the period, both of which were considerable. It is enough to say that this was a violent time and that the man at the center of it inspired a great deal of fear, and to move on. The intention behind the army seems to have been that the arrangements of the living world should continue after death, that an emperor should have his guard, his stables, his officials, his musicians, all present in clay. Whole other pits have been found containing bronze waterbirds, acrobats, and civil officials with writing kits. It was not only an army. It was an entire household. The tomb mound itself has never been opened. It stands about a mile from the pits, 40-odd meters high now, considerably higher when it was built, planted over with pomegranate trees. The historian Sima Qian, writing about a century afterwards, describes what is supposed to be inside, a model of the empire with its rivers and seas rendered in flowing mercury, and the heavens represented above. For a long time this was assumed to be embellishment. Then soil surveys of the mound found unusually high concentrations of mercury in the earth above it, in a distribution that some researchers have argued roughly matches the geography of China. That does not prove the account, but it is a striking piece of corroboration for a detail everyone had assumed was decorative. The mound will most likely stay closed for a good while yet. The reasoning is the same as with the paint. If opening it would destroy what is inside, then the responsible thing is to wait, possibly for generations, until the methods are better. There is something admirable in an archaeology that is willing to leave the biggest question deliberately unanswered. The village that dug the well is now beside a very large museum, and the site receives millions of visitors a year. The men who found it became local figures of a modest kind. The orchard is gone. What has stayed with me, reading about it, is how ordinary the beginning was. It was a dry spring. The commune needed water. Somebody chose a spot in an orchard, more or less at random, and it happened to be within a few meters of a corner of a pit 230 meters long. A little to the left and they would have hit nothing but soil, dug their well, drawn their water, and the field would still be a field. And beneath it, in the dark, the ranks would still be standing where they were placed, arms bent to hold spears that rotted away long ago, ears modeled one at a time by men whose names are stamped under their collars, faces still faintly pink under a skin of lacquer, all of them facing east, waiting for nothing in particular. So we will leave them there, quietly, in the dark of the Lurs, with the color still on them where no one has looked. The field above is silent. The trees are in leaf. Nothing needs to be dug up tonight. You can let all the numbers and names go now, they were never the point. Sleep well. Sleepy history, true stories, told slowly.